Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to give you just a moment to start to settle in to your Zoom room. We're really happy that you're here. I'm Julie Moose. I'm the Executive Director of the National Press Club Journalism Institute, and I'm going to introduce our panel in just a moment. But first, I want to welcome you to this really exciting week where we're kicking off the series of career workshops that were designed by the Institute Senior Director, Beth Francesco, to help you manage your professional growth. So you're going to hear a lot of specific guidance today on what hiring managers want you to know. And I'll let you know more about the rest of the programs later in the week as we wrap up this program in about an hour. So I would just want to let you know ahead of time, we are going to be recording this, so you will receive the recording. So take notes if you have questions, but just know that you will be able to watch this and refer to this if you want in the future. I hope you will have questions. I hope you will ask your questions. We'd love to see them in the Q&A queue so that we can bring them into the program throughout the conversation among our panel. And we'll also save a little bit of time at the end for questions too. So we're gonna talk, as I said, about what hiring managers wish you knew, and we could not have gathered a better group of people to talk about that. I'm really honored to be introducing them. So first, we have Priska Neely, who is managing editor for Gulf States Newsroom, which is a regional partnership with NPR and public media in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. So Priska is involved in hiring at the local and regional levels. We have Traci Schweikert, who is Chief Talent Officer at POLITICO, who's involved there and prior to there at NPR in hiring and talent development at the national level. And we have Mizell Stewart III, who is Vice President, News Performance, Talent and Partnerships for Gannett and the USA Today Network. And he's involved in hiring, coaching, mentoring, promoting at the local, national, and regional levels. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to learn from you. And so let's go ahead and dive in. And let's start with the most important things you look for in a job candidate. And Mizell, if you can go first, and then Traci and Priska.
Absolutely, and hello everyone. It's great to be with you. We really look for three things as we're hiring. First and foremost, it's about the experience an individual brings to the role. It's not just on paper what you've done in terms of a resume, but really showing us how have you reported, how have you done digital production, how have you managed social media accounts, and telling a great story in a resume and cover letter is one aspect of it, but really what we're looking for is that proof of performance. The other thing that we're really looking at is that you have taken the time before you've applied to actually connect your application to the role that you're applying to. One of the things I see very often is a candidate will apply over and over again to multiple jobs. In my organization, we have dozens of jobs available around the country, but I can't always tell that somebody has spent time connecting their experience to the actual job at hand. And so, we want you to be a reporter and to actually do some research on the position and on the organization to tailor your approach and apply to positions that really fit with your sense of where you would like to go with your career. And I know, Traci, you shared a little bit about that as well as we prepared.
Yeah, thanks, Mizell. It's great to be working with you again on this. Absolutely. I think the one thing that I get most disappointed about in the interview process is when I see somebody submit a cover letter or a resume that looks like it's for a different job than the one that's in front of you. It is really easy to just send out, sometimes even within the same organization, multiple applications. What y'all should know is, especially those of us in large organizations, we can often see all the jobs you've applied for. As we were preparing, I was telling a story of when I was at NPR, I would see people literally apply for 12 jobs at a time, everywhere from host to assistant producer. And when I see that, my first question is, what job do they really want, right? What job are they really hoping to get? Or are they just throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping that it'll catch in one job or another? As you're thinking about it, go back to the job description, right? As humans, there are certain words that we use that we're looking for. And so if you see that, I'll use an HR example, right? If I call it talent versus HR, if you go through your resume and just update it to use the word talent instead of HR, as I'm skimming through so many resumes, I'll see words that I identify with, and I'll take a second look, right? So really going back and looking at that specific job posting and saying, how do I have those skills, and how do I either draw that in with my resume or my cover letter, right? I think the other thing that is a missed opportunity, especially for journalists, right? All of you are in the job of writing and reporting. You are excellent writers. Your cover letter should tell a succinct story about why you've come to this particular role. Why are you excited to work for this organization? Why this role, and why we should hire you in particular? And it should be absolutely tailored to each and every job. It's a little bit of an extra step, but it really goes a long way. I will tell you, if I have, in some cases, 100 applications to look for, if I see something that, somebody says, I'm looking for a reporter, but somebody says my dream job is associate producer, I'll probably put those in the I'll get to you on the second round pile, rather than really digging in and realizing that the skills are there. So as Mizell has mentioned, really use those skills as a journalist and be really specific about the job that you're applying for, and tailor it. You can certainly tailor it if you're applying for a couple of jobs at a larger organization, but make sure that you take that extra step. Priska, I know you've got some insight there from what you started to see as a hiring manager as well.
Yeah, so I am pretty new to this game of being a decision maker in hiring. I've been in my role at the Gulf States Newsroom, which is also a new collaboration, for about 7 months now. But I think what I'll offer, and I'm really agreeing with these amazing tips so far, is advice for early career journalists, maybe recent graduates who are just starting to kind of survey your options and want to make those connections. I often have a lot of people reach out to me, maybe they've heard about me, or someone mentioned my name, and people just kind of reach out to me wanting to connect. And I think, kind of playing off of what you've talked about being a journalist and using those skills, the more specific that you can be when you're reaching out to someone like that and saying, hey, I saw this story that you reported it, or I'm familiar with this story that you did. I wanted to know how you did it, or something to show that you've kind of put in your work on your end. Because otherwise it's like, if I'm going to take time to talk to you, I want to know that you've already gotten the baseline answers that are Googleable about me and that you've read things that I've kind of written in the past. And then you can ask me a specific question about you, so that we're all being efficient with our time. I think it's really important to be respectful of people's time when you're asking for that kind of general advice. And sometimes the kind of blanket outreach can feel like it was like a class assignment or something, to reach out to a certain number of people. But you want it to feel like, hey, I really want to know something specific from you, and I've done my research already, so that I'm using your time most efficiently. And attention to detail, as Traci and Mizell were saying, and really using connections. I think the world of public radio, where I am, is extremely small, but the world of journalism in general is small. All of us on this panel are connected in various ways. I used to work with Traci at NPR. Figure out if you know someone who may work there, have someone vouch for you if you're going for a position. You know, that's something that can really help if you're applying for something. Just get someone to send an email or a text. Hey, so is applying for this. I used to work with them. They're great. Check them out. That can make a big difference for the hiring manager, and also just getting your application up higher in a pile, especially if you're applying for those big jobs like at Politico and at Gannett.
Wanted to come back around real quick to just what it takes really at different stages in your career, because I shared at the beginning that gate number one, at least for me, is what can you do and what have you done. We're really looking for that proof of performance, and a great resume and a great cover letter is table stakes, basically. What comes after that, and what so many people don't pay enough attention to, is curating your work product, if you will. And a lot of times what people will do is to put a link to the website on the resume and say, well, here, this is all of my work. Well, is all of your work on your website necessarily your best work? And this is really where thinking about the job, thinking about, as Traci talked about, how are you tailoring your presentation to the job? And a real opportunity for you to do that is through links to samples of your work. And you can lead with links to the job that you want, and it's really easy to change the order of those links to individual stories, individual social media posts, individual videos. It just all depends on the role that you're going for. And the thing that I noticed too is that most of us use what I like to call applicant tracking systems. And these are web-based systems where you upload resumes, you upload cover letters. And I really feel like these are missed opportunities for people to put their best foot forward, because what people tend to do is to upload a one-page resume and that's it, and consider their application to be done. And what the one-page resume tells me is very little. What I recommend is that you upload multiple pages. You upload a resume first, then a cover letter, then samples of your work. Show me what you can do. Don't just point me to a website and call it a day. And thinking about how you do that at different stages of your career. If you're more experienced and you're going for a more senior role, again, you want to submit samples that really reflect where you are in your career.
Thank you, Mizell. I mean, I think that's a really interesting distinction, which I think we're going to come back to in terms of advice for early in career, early advice mid-career. I think before we go further down that road, I want to ask you, Priska, first, and then others, to talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes that you're seeing people make. And Priska, you have a particularly powerful analogy that I think can help people understand how to navigate their career. So let's start there.
Yeah, and I think that this comes from personal experience with kind of thinking about career mapping. And, I've been in public media like on a full-time basis for about 11 years now. And when I look back at the jobs that I've had, I couldn't have anticipated it. I couldn't have said, this is exactly what I thought I was going to do. I've always known I wanted to be a journalist. I've always had a passion for leadership, and I knew that I wanted to be in a position to help other people do their best work. But it wasn't like I could, be an intern and be like, I want to be a managing editor tomorrow. You have to think about the experiences that you can have along the way and what you can learn from each of those experiences. So I remember a few years ago, I was talking to an intern who was kind of saying, that there were different jobs that they didn't want to have. And I don't want to work at a member station. I just want to be a reporter at NPR. And I'm like, okay, that's not how it works. Like you're not just going to be a reporter at NPR after this internship. You may need to, work at a member station. And I was telling them about this concept that kind of thought of on the spot, which is about you have your compass and you have your GPS. If you want to be an NPR reporter, that can be your long-term goal. That can be the direction that you're heading in, but it may not be your next turn. It may not be take your next turn to NPR reporter. For me, I was an intern at NPR, and I was looking for different temp work, and I worked at Talk of the Nation, the live call-in talk show. And a lot of people were not necessarily trying to work there because you weren't cutting tape, you weren't putting together packages for the radio, you were dealing with live callers, you were booking guests on extremely short turnaround times. And the skills that I got there made me a better reporter, made me better at, when I had to cold call sources because I was on the other end of the line, screening calls. So it's like every job that I had, I learned things that made me better at the next job, even though it wasn't like, I'm going to be an editor tomorrow, but you can still take a look at it and say your GPS, like what's the best next turn for you? And does that align with your overall compass, your overall long-term goal? And that can be as broad as like being in public service journalism or being a host. You can work on that and build your skill set so that you're getting closer to that long-term goal. I guess, yeah, Tracy.
Yeah, no, I Priska, that is such an important analogy, and I love it. Ever since you shared it with us last week, it's something that I've been thinking about. I do think for a long time, the concept of a career ladder, right, and a very specific straight line path that gets you from point A to point B is what people hope for, right? And at the end of the day, it would be easier that way if there was a nice straight line. But I do think being open to every twist and turn is really important. Along those same lines, as you take those twists and turns, make sure that the hiring manager or the organization that you hope to work for someday appreciates all the right and left turns that you've made. One of the things that I see, and I know later this week, there's going to be a session specifically about LinkedIn. And so I'd love to do a quick plug here. One of the things that I see specifically with journalists is that they are not regularly going back and updating their LinkedIn profiles. As Mizell mentioned earlier today, particularly in larger organizations that do have applicant tracking systems, the way that we collect a lot of resumes, we often also have recruiters that help us develop pipelines of candidates to consider, right? And often one of the things that they do is go out on LinkedIn, or they do a Boolean search, a good old-fashioned Boolean search on the internet, and they are looking for folks with different titles, different backgrounds. And it's such a disappointment when somebody probably has had that skill, but hasn't taken a couple of minutes to update their LinkedIn profile. I realize updating your resume, doing a performance review, updating your LinkedIn profile, those are the things that as humans, we don't love to do. I'm a talent professional. I don't love doing it even for myself, but it's such an important part, especially in the information age, that you keep that data up to date so that if a recruiter is pulling a pipeline, that they see that you had time as a reporter, or maybe you did a little production work on the side and that you get credit for that so that you can be included in those pools. And hopefully then organizations are also reaching out to you just as you're reaching out to them. So the one thing that I always like to say there is don't opt out before you give yourself a chance to opt in. Make sure that your outward facing information is as update as possible. That does mean LinkedIn. It also means in some cases Twitter, right? Does your Twitter bio include not only the company that you are working for, but you've got a formerly or used to be, and you're including some of that data there, because we're also starting to see savvy hiring managers use Twitter as an opportunity to find folks with specific expertise as well. So again, give yourself as many chances as possible by using all of that outward facing information to be current to all the great work that you're doing. And Mizell, I know you've got a lot of experience in that regard too, and probably have some additional tips.
Well, I'll reinforce, keep your LinkedIn profile updated. We are in the process of scheduling candidates for a couple of virtual career fairs that are coming up this week and next week. And the second thing folks do once you're looked up in the applicant tracking system is to pull up your LinkedIn profile. And so it's pretty glaring at times when, you've put a great deal of time and energy in your resume, but not as much time and energy in the LinkedIn profile. So people just consider those to be pretty interchangeable. But I do want to go back to what Priska mentioned before. I love the concept of, think about your career, with a GPS rather than a compass. And when I think about that analogy, hiring managers really want to know that you have a direction for your career. That you want to go somewhere, you want to accomplish certain things, and it may not necessarily be that straight line. My own example is, all I ever wanted to be was a small town newspaper editor, and I had the chance to do that for the first time back in 2003 in Tallahassee, Florida. And I never really thought that I was going to progress beyond that. But what was interesting was, once I achieved that milestone, then there were other opportunities that came about, and so the destination changed a little bit. But when in having conversations with hiring managers about other opportunities, my GPS was always around leadership and wanting to exercise leadership in a news organization in a variety of different ways. And that's what people want. People want to see that you are ambitious, that you want to achieve. No one wants to bring somebody in the organization who's like, I've arrived, I'm done, thank you very much, because all of our organizations want to grow and adapt and do better.
This is such great advice. I find myself listening and not realizing that it's time to hop in with another question. So thank you. You've talked a little bit about early career and a little bit about people at other stages of their career. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit in terms of your advice and how you might direct people at the beginning of their careers, compared to somebody who is perhaps mid-career or who is later in their career and, potentially having dealt with the buyout or a layoff or being perceived as overqualified for certain things. Let's start with early. And we have a question from Jose Luis Martinez, who says, I graduate a year from now. What are the best things soon to be graduates can do to prepare before applying for jobs?
I can take that. I think, I speak to college classes pretty regularly, and I'm always surprised by kind of like the questions. I'm like, oh, I'm worried about what's happening. In terms of, I feel like people should know certain things when they graduate, but I think that when I was in college, the term networking was really intimidating for me. I thought I needed to be doing some fancy LinkedIn thing, or I needed to I don't even know what I thought, but it was intimidating concept. And I think now I understand it to just mean that wherever you are, you make connections while you're there. And then when you move on, you stay in touch with the people. So, in college, I think one thing is your professors probably were working journalists at some point. Talk to them, find out who they know, who they may be able to connect you with. Do you have a professor who used to work where you want to work? Kind of just starting even when you're in school, building that network. And then if you've had various internships, I mean, this world is really small. The people that you've worked with have probably worked somewhere else, and they know people where you're going to try to work. So making a good impression, and that means being tactful. That doesn't mean, starting your internship in the first day, like, really approaching everyone and asking them everything, but, being curious, asking someone where they, how they got to where they are in their careers, and letting people know what you're interested in so that they can keep you in mind, making a good impression wherever you are. And then when you move to that next step, keep in touch with people, and not always when you're asking for something. Keep in touch and just say, hey, just wanted to let you know, I had my first story on this week, wanted to send you a link. Don't need anything, just reminding you that I exist, like keeping, liking people's tweets, like just finding subtle ways to remind people that you exist, so that when you need to ask them for something, you can do that, and they're not like, who is this person? It's like keeps you on people's radar. And I think also just something that I thought about a lot for interns and for people who are just starting out, like be a person, be your full self in ways that are appropriate. Don't always just be like pitching or talking to people, asking them for advice, because that can be like a little overwhelming. If you're in the kitchen with someone, oh, I use that oat milk also. I don't know. Talk to them about, things that like show your humanity. Oh, someone likes this sports team and you also like the sports team. Like, find ways to just connect with people on a human level. Those things really make a difference. And then, getting, if you're about to graduate, getting all your LinkedIn stuff together, like all that stuff is free. Like, you can just do that. Go in there and get your LinkedIn. Make a Twitter if you're nervous about tweeting, follow people that you like, make lists of journalists that are doing what you want to do, like their tweets, retweet their stuff. That's a way to have a Twitter presence if you don't have anything to say, or if you're nervous about saying something, because it took me a long time to personally get over my fears of Twitter. But when you have those connections that you've made, you're like forming your network. Make sure to activate your network when you are applying for something, because sometimes I have people who are like, oh, I just submitted my application for this, or I didn't do, or oh, I didn't get that job, I applied for it. And I'm like, did I know that you applied for it? Why didn't you tell me that you were applying? I could have told you, if I already know you, I could have told you, oh, this is what they're looking for. Use this buzzword, I could have told people. So make those connections, but make sure to use those connections tactfully, once again, not bugging people, being respectful of people's time, but using those connections while you have it. And if you're in an internship, do all of that stuff from the beginning. Don't just wait until the last week when all the interns are going to be trying to talk to everybody. Think about how you can do it from the beginning. When I was an intern at NPR, I had a list of people I wanted to talk to. And this is just the last thing I'll say on this, but like, one of those people was Keith Woods, the vice president of diversity. He was just starting out in that role. I knew his secretary. I'm like, can you get me on his schedule? And I just went and I just asked him some questions about the job. And, it was new. I stayed in touch with him over the years. And every time I've moved into a different job, he vouched for me when I was trying to move from producing to reporting. He vouched for me when I was moving from reporting and producing to editing, like activating your network. And especially when we're talking about diversity and people moving on and advancing in their careers, and maybe they haven't proven it on their resume, they don't have it written on their resume. When you have activated your network, people can vouch for you, and the hiring manager can be like, oh, well, if so-and-so says, but if I didn't tell people that I was applying for the job that I have now, they wouldn't have been able to do that work. So forming your network and then activating it.
Priska, those points are so great. I'm going to build off of some of Priska's ideas because they are spot on. And you heard both Mizell and Priska talk earlier about just reporting it out and using your reporting skills. As you're thinking about some of the things that Priska mentioned to you, how do you handle that information in the same way you would as a reporter, right? So in Priska's example, you're in the break room with so-and-so, and you both find out you use the same kind of oat milk, right? And then, you know, they come out with a new flavor or something else. You can send a quick note and say, hey, I remember you like that oat milk. Did you try the vanilla version, right? And it's just a quick touch base to do that. My husband, who is not in the world of journalism, but is in the world of sales and has taught me a lot about networking, keeps all of that in his contacts information, right? When you are keeping someone's mobile number and email address, you've got that notes section. Jot down a couple of things that you talked to that person about. Oh, we were both following ACC basketball, right? So just write that in there. Or so-and-so's daughter just got married, put that in there. And so when you then do go back just to do a quick touch base, you've got that personal information that you've got in your notes. Again, many of the folks on this particular Zoom are experts at keeping track of really good data and figuring out ways to begin a conversation with someone, more often than not, with someone who doesn't want to have a conversation with you. If you then apply those skills to somebody who genuinely wants to help you, think about how much more productive that conversation would be. So, you know, as Priska mentions, if you do have an internship, absolutely do not wait until the final week, because what happens is, you know, nobody has any free slots left, right? Because every intern is trying to get in before they walk out the door. And to be honest with you, those are not the most meaningful conversations. Use that time that you are inside an organization to learn and to meet as many folks. The other thing that I always tell folks to do is when you're an intern or a temp, start looking at the internal only postings. Right? Start to get a feel for the jobs that are filled internally first. Or as you make connections with folks, you know, I know that we typically, you know, your organization typically does this type of opportunity internal only first. Could you let me know when you see that? Because I'd love to get that extra in on a conversation for when it does go external. Because more often than not, if there isn't an internal, that job turns over to an external search pretty quickly, and you want to be on the front end of that. So again, really keep good contact notes, not just the name, not just the title, not just the email, but how are you connected to that individual, so that, per Priska's point, you can then say, hey, I saw this article, or hey, I knew you were working on this particular investigative piece or this series, and I saw it and it looks really great. I'd love to have a conversation with you about how you accomplished that, so that I can keep those skills in mind down the road. So really just use your great reporting skills, but apply them to yourself. Mizell, any other feedback there?
Well, both you, Priska, and you, Traci, had, you know, wonderful advice about, you know, kind of navigating within the organization, and, you know, particularly if you're lucky enough to have an internship and be inside, if you will. You know, there's some, you know, really great opportunities. I wanted to elevate a suggestion posted in the chat about, you know, staying in touch with people even if they can't help you right now. And you know, there was a gentleman who was very instrumental in my career by the name of Tim Kelly, who was the managing editor and then the editor of the Lexington Herald Leader in Kentucky. Tim, I never worked for Tim, but Tim was instrumental in my career over the years because he knew everybody. And when I needed a reference, I had interviewed with his organization a couple of times. I never took the job, but we always stayed in touch. And there were a couple of times when I literally needed to get an introduction to someone to open a path for me. I met my wife and I needed to move to another city. And I called Tim and I said, Tim, do you know anybody here? And he said, absolutely. And Tim made an introduction for me that led to the job that, you know, was, you know, an 11-year career arc. And it was all about maintaining a connection with somebody who wasn't necessarily in a position to do something for me at that particular time. I want to go back though to the original question, which was, here was, the young man who's, got a little bit of time left in school and wants to make sure that he's prepared. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Take every opportunity to produce published work product. Another question in the Q&A around fellowships. Are they a good idea and what weight do they play? Nothing, unless they lead to published work product. You could have the most prestigious fellowship there is, but unless you're able to draw a straight line between that fellowship and what you can do for me in the job that I'm hiring for, that's the only way that that fellowship is meaningful. And so emphasizing those experiences that allow you to get on the job experience while you are still a student.
Excellent, excellent, excellent advice. And thank you for answering the fellowship question as part of that too. You touched on something, Mizell, that I want to come back to, that you are particularly known for and adept at. And that is the idea of identifying early people who are very talented and staying in touch years before there's a job. You talked about it in the context of somebody that you were in touch with who never hired you directly, but you yourself are really diligent about developing relationships with people well before there may be a job for them, and also continuing to be in a relationship in an ongoing coaching way and helping people move along, which is another question that we got. How do you, and I believe it was from Gwen, how can you best position yourself to eventually have a leadership role in a company? So let's start with you, Mizell.
Well, one networking question. I hate networking. I'm an introvert at heart. The idea of going into a room full of people and trying to meet folks and introduce myself, and I can't stand it. I can't stand it. And I had to figure out how do I manage that? And so I developed a technique which I recommend to everybody who will listen, which is, you can have a conversation with just about any hiring manager you want to, as long as you're not calling them to ask them for a job. What you do is you say, I would love to have a job like you have someday. What advice do you have for me? Or, you cold call somebody from a news organization you've always wanted to work for, and you say, I'm not calling about a job because frankly, I know I'm not ready for you just yet, even though you might be. But no, I'm not ready for you just yet. What would it take to work for your news organization someday? And engage people in that kind of conversation. And what I find is that when you engage people that way, they're instantly not defensive because they don't have to tell you no, because you're not asking them to tell you anything other than what it takes, and they can be as lofty as they want to be. And I find that people, I tend to also gravitate to people who really take that long view for their careers. There are people who I may want to pursue for a particular opportunity, and it's not the right time for them, but I remember them, and we just stay in touch. There are other circumstances where we may meet on campus, and you just make a positive impression with someone. And so again, you're just checking in. Your goal in all of this is just to be a name in somebody's head. Because if you become a name in somebody's head, and you've already passed the gates in terms of your work product and your experience, what happens is you're being thought of for that next level. Now, I want to go to the question about, how do you position yourself for a leadership role? If you want to run a newsroom, you need to get in touch with me. You know why? Because those are the people I'm looking for. You don't necessarily have to run a newsroom today, but I want to know people who aspire to that. And then we can have those ongoing conversations around what it takes, because it's going to be a little bit different depending on, what kind of leadership role you want to have. It's going to be a little bit different if you are, say, want to have a leadership role in a national news organization versus a local news organization. In other words, there's not one size, a one size fits all straight line career path, but engaging with people who have the job that you want before you're ready for it is really the ticket to prepare.
Yeah, I was just, there's so many moments that really resonate with me, but I just want to say, like, Mizell, what you're describing, that is networking. That is networking. Like, I think we need to demystify networking. Networking is not like putting on your suit and going to a mixer and being
But that's
like,
what everybody
"Oh."
makes it seem like.
I know, we need to demystify it. Like, it is doing what you're doing. It is, sliding into someone's DMs and asking them a specific thing. But also in your description, you said, like, you're asking them a specific question. You need to, like, remember to do that research, like, show that you're a journalist before you ask them. Make sure you look at the LinkedIn of someone you're talking to, like, don't just ask, how did you get to where you are? Like, if you can be more specific, like, how did you transition from producer to reporter? I see that you used to be a producer, a reporter, now you're an editor. How do, just something to show that you've done your part. If I'm going to take time to give advice, then you need to do a little bit of that work on the other end. And just like being a name in someone's head, because especially for leadership, a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people are not interested in that. So it's really important for the people who are at the head of your companies to know that. That's something that people have known about me since I was an intern. So they knew that when different opportunities open up to consider me for that. And sometimes people can, when you meet with like the CEO of your company, even when you're a producer, you're a reporter, whatever, but to say, hey, I'd like to be in a role like yours one day, they can also look out for opportunities like, hey, did you know we have this training program? Or, I can have you apply to this thing. I know the person who runs it, like, to do different training programs that can prepare you and put you on that path. And you can add those people to your network of people who can vouch for you when you're there.
And Priska, that goes back to what your framing of a compass versus a GPS. If you don't communicate with people what your aspirations are,
right,
you would be stunned at how many times people will get frustrated in an organization because they don't feel like their career is moving fast enough. Mm-hmm. And what I come back to is I say, okay, well, did you talk to these people and share your aspirations? And more often than not, the answer will come back, well, no.
Right.
Well, I don't have time to read your mind. But I will help you if you express yourself and you say, this is where I want to go. And, I want you to advance. I want you to succeed. So let's make sure that it's that two-way dialogue. And so Priska's got great advice about tell people that that's what you want to do.
I think the other thing, and I agree with both of you, both Priska and Mizell, right? This concept that networking is hard and it's scary, like all of those things are true, right? I am an off the chart extrovert. I am not an introvert. But one of the things that I have learned is when I am at a networking event and somebody works up the courage to come and talk to me, they come up and they say, hi. I'm so-and-so from such and such organization, and the conversation stops. If you've worked up the courage, if you're not someone who's comfortable networking, to introduce yourself to Mizell and Priska as hiring managers, please, please, please do not waste the opportunity by not having a great question to start a conversation. As Mizell has indicated, right, that he's an introvert, right? Don't make him do the work. in the networking situation, right? You want him to do the work, but you want his work to be great advice on where to go next. So come in with a really impactful question, right? If you were at an event, tie it into that event. If he was on a panel and we were together and you would then have an opportunity to network him after, make yourselves a couple of notes and say, hey, Mizell, when you mentioned this in particular, I'd love to hear a little bit more about it. Or if you're reaching out to Priska, hey, Priska, I just saw this body of work that your organization, put out there. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about it. Don't squander the opportunity. The other thing that I will say is this is one of the benefits of the pandemic, right? Like, you don't have to walk up to somebody today. You don't have to ask them to schedule a half-hour coffee and then travel time on either side where it might be more of a lift. You can actually reach out and say, hey, could we jump on the phone for 15 or 20 minutes? Could we do a quick Zoom call, right? Use the pandemic to your advantage. I mean, good golly, wouldn't it be great to have one advantage out of the pandemic, right? Let's use this moment to network in a little bit of an easier way. And again, in that situation, you then have the opportunity to do a little bit of reporting and start with that really good, can you tell me about how you achieved this? I'd love to learn more because someday that's something else I'd like to do. So we've all said it in several different ways. Use those reporting skills to your advantage, right? If you're early in your career, this is a great way to practice. Practice with a safe person who you can talk about your own development before you have to reach out to a source. It's a great way just to keep practicing what you're doing.
This is such great advice. Thank you. And you'll see people in the chat, if you haven't already, reiterating what great advice this is. I'm almost inspired to want to look for a job listening to you guys. I'm not, but it does remind me that job searches are long. They're a long process. They're a long game. I mean, sometimes you're looking passively, sometimes you're looking more actively, and in either scenario, there's a lot of time involved. And I wonder how you would coach people to continue to stay confident and motivated in the face of what feels like serial rejection.
Yeah, so the one thing that I always say to folks is your career is a game of chess, right? You should certainly be thinking, as Priska uses the compass GPS analogy. I use the chess analogy, maybe because Queen's Gambit is top of mind for me these days. But thinking about your next move and the impact that that move could potentially have. And I say this to folks because sometimes the next best move for you might be a lateral move. It might be trying something new where you may feel initially like, oh gosh, people will think I'm taking a step back. But to Mizell's point, what is your story, right? If you can then go into a conversation and say, I went here and then I went here for these reasons, because I had a long-term goal of ultimately being in leadership. And the best way for me to get some leadership skills was to take this job here so I could be a player coach, or because I had the opportunity to work with interns and manage their career, right? And those, again, are the things that are not going to necessarily show up on a resume. And so that's where you've got to be able to articulate the game of chess that you're playing at all times, right? Most chess players are keeping it all in here for their own strategy. In this situation, you want to say it out loud. You want to say, this is what I'm trying. This is what I'm thinking. And for goodness sake, do not think that the steps you take, people will look at as a good move or a bad move, right? You're the only one who knows where your career is going to go. And again, if you can articulate, I took this step for this reason, even if that reason is I was laid off and I wanted to make sure that I stayed in journalism. And so it was important for me to get back into journalism. And this was the way that I could get back into journalism. As a hiring manager, that's an amazing, important step for me. Again, don't opt out before you give yourself the chance to opt in. So think about all those individual moves and then the impact that that's going to have for you longer term.
Traci, I can't reinforce that enough, and even your description of playing chess with your career. And I remember leaving the top newsroom job in Akron, Ohio, to go to work in Evansville, Indiana, back in 2006. And literally all of the questions around my departure were, why would he leave Akron, Ohio, a 4-time Pulitzer Prize winning newspaper, to go to Evansville, Indiana? And it was a very simple reason. I went to work for an actual newspaper company after the Beacon Journal changed hands to a very small publishing company. And that move literally led to the start of my corporate news career, because I was promoted from Evansville to be the chief content officer of Scripps Newspapers. And it was because that particular move, that change of scenery, just opened up an entirely different vista for my career, and it was about making a choice of company rather than a choice of location. And I want to emphasize that when you are thinking about the long view in your career, sometimes you have to consider taking a step down to make a step up. And I've done that a couple of times in my career, where I've gone from a larger market to a much smaller market for more responsibility, for a different corporate environment, and those moves made judiciously can truly pay off. And so if you find yourself coming into rejection after rejection at one level, maybe what you do is to look a little bit differently at another type of news organization that would fall all over itself to get someone with your level of talent, because you can always make that move back up.
Yeah, and I would also just say, sometimes I think when it comes to rejection, you can take it really personally. When there are so many other factors and pieces that it can be really good to just apply again. I just even at the beginning level with internships and stuff, apply again, apply the next round. I applied 3 times for an NPR internship before I got it. It's part of it, and it's not taking it personally, like, oh, they don't want me. They just, they don't want me. It's like, no, maybe it was really competitive. Maybe there was the regional thing. Maybe, there could be tons of different factors, but just go for things again. Keep in touch with people. If someone doesn't reply to your email the one time, it doesn't mean that they hate you. It's probably there was breaking news that day or something. There can be a lot of reasons that people don't get back. Once again, be tactful, be respectful of people's time. But the tendency to take things really personally is not, it's not productive, and it's usually not the case.
That is excellent life advice, not just excellent job search advice. I wanted to share a question from Mark Schaff, who is one of the editors of The Wire for the National Press Club. He asks, what about mid-career or mid-career plus job hunters? We cost more than young reporters. And I would add that sometimes there's the perception that they're overqualified. He says, how can we prove we're worth it?
Apply for the right job. Don't just apply to any job. Apply to jobs that specifically ask for that level of experience. I have any number of opportunities that are geared toward more senior reporters. Unfortunately, they're not in and around Washington. So, I think there are roles that call for people with, deep talent, deep experience. They're just not always concentrated in a single geographic area, but look for those, those opportunities that that specifically call out in the description that a more senior candidate is being sought, and there'll be a good match. I think if what's happening is you're applying across the board to reporting opportunities, it really does give people that chance to go with someone who may not have quite as much experience, but that experience is good enough. But there are truly senior reporter opportunities out there, just to make sure that you look for those opportunities.
And I think similarly, as we've mentioned in other places, and Mizell and Priska have pointed out, that's why a very specific resume, cover letter, reach out to someone in the organization can also help you, right? Because sometimes it's an opportunity to talk to a hiring manager about a job that they don't have yet. And so you have to be willing to take that as a networking moment rather than as a moment where you're going to fill a job in particular. If you're in a situation where maybe you've been a leader or a people manager for a while and you've decided, I'd rather go back to daily news for whatever reason, making sure that that's clear to folks as well. So again, many of the different pieces of advice that we've given to all of you tie together. And how do you weave that into the conversations that you're having? And again, sometimes the end result may not be a job for you today, but you've been able to polish off your story about yourself and your career. You've hopefully made some new connections, and hopefully that will bear fruit down the road.
Thank you, guys. There are many questions we haven't gotten to, and I'm sure there are many questions people haven't even asked yet that they have. So I'm just going to encourage all of the folks who are participating to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A queue, even if you haven't asked them yet, or if we haven't answered them. And I will share them with our wonderful panel with our thank yous. And if there's time and they're able to respond, then I'll forward those responses on to you. Okay. So I'm sorry we didn't get to everything, but I'm really, really grateful for all of the questions that you did answer and all of the great advice that you guys have provided. I know there's much more where that came from. And fortunately, this is just the beginning of a week of career workshops. So we're going to continue tomorrow with tapping Twitter networks in your job search. You've heard how important networking is. So we'll talk tomorrow at noon about Twitter. On Wednesday, we will have the session on how to leverage LinkedIn in your job search. You've heard a lot about LinkedIn. So if you're not exactly sure where to go next with it, this will help you. And then Thursday is going to be how to rev up your resume. So I know there were some questions about resumes that we didn't get to. And we will make sure to put those in the queue for Thursday. So the link to sign up is in the chat, and we have made these programs available to you at no cost. We know job seekers may be counting pennies, as may everybody right now, but we hope if you learned something valuable today or any of these programs or any of our programs that you'll support our work with a donation, even $1. Every single contribution and vote of support really helps, and we really appreciate it. We will also send you the recording from this afternoon, as I mentioned, and we'll send you a survey too, so that you can let us know what worked for you and let us know what else that we need so that we can keep designing programs that are going to be as essential for journalists as journalism is for society. So stay well. Thank you all again for being here, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.